Tropical Storm Nalgae drawing closer to the Philippines on tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for October 28th. Right now, the main feature is a new tropical storm, Nalgae, that formed quite a while ago now in the early part of the last 24 hours, Philippine name Paeng, and is expected to draw closer to the northern part of the Philippines over the next couple of days. It could make landfall in as soon as 24 hours if it strikes Catanduanes. In the Atlantic though, it's day 150 of hurricane season and we've still got those two areas of interest in the same areas, although the chances have gone down slightly with model support breaking down, but still a 40% chance for the Caribbean system and a 30% chance of a short-lived system in the Sargasso Sea. Day 167 in the Eastern Pacific, and there are no areas of interest right now. So has the basin shut down? Well, we're not fully sure yet, but no signs of life right now in this late season. And Western Pacific, of course, we're tracking Nalgae there, approaching the Philippine Islands, and the area of interest behind it as well, still showing signs of development, 40% chance in the next 5 days, and those chances are slowly beginning to rise. And in the Indian Ocean, we look towards the South Indian right now, where we've marked a 10% area of interest now for the sort of eastern side of the Southern Indian Ocean. A potential system could be on the way next week. It would likely remain out to sea and fairly weak, but it could get to Category 1 intensity possibly. Latest satellite imagery, and you can still see this very large wedge of a line of storms and general inclement weather there across the whole Atlantic. Massive trough that's extending from the eastern Caribbean all the way up the Atlantic, probably responsible for both of those systems that we're going to be monitoring. The Eastern Pacific comparatively quiet with dry air choking off most of the intertropical convergence zone. Never mind the rest of the tropics, but a few thunderstorms still blowing up in the region, but generally very hostile conditions there in the Eastern Pacific. Here's the Western Pacific, and well, mainly a look at Nalgae. Of course, here it is once again. As mentioned before, the Philippine name is Paeng, and it's headed towards the Philippine Islands. Signal 2 warnings are now in effect for parts of Samar, and I believe possibly further on, I'm not sure just now, but Signal 2 warnings are in effect for some of these locations, and Signal 1 warnings extending much further up towards the northwest. This storm could make landfall in Catanduanes in the next 24 hours. If it misses land, it will probably end up making landfall again in 48 hours time roughly on Sunday in central Luzon, possibly in Aurora province, but it's still a bit early to call a landfall area yet. Here is the wider imagery of the geocolor showing how the storm is looking. Look how much of those cloud tops are bubbling up on the western side over the Philippine Islands themselves, well away from the center of the storm, but this could result in a big flooding issue here with very large rain rates probably occurring underneath those clouds right now. Very high cloud tops when you look at this imagery particularly. Look at some of those yellow colors well into the minus 80s. And some even white colors there into minus 90 degrees Celsius. That usually indicates a huge amount of rain occurring underneath those areas, so definitely a point of concern right now for the southern Visayas into the northern part of Mindanao, as well as in the northern part of the Visayas region more sporadically, and into southeastern Luzon. Here's another view of the storm right now again with some more of those really big convective tops. It's going to be extremely heavy rainfall, persistent, torrential, and likely to cause flooding and landslides, and a much bigger risk right now to the storm's winds. And a wider view and a longer view, the last 24 hours in the Western Pacific, you can see just how that storm has started to produce all of those massive cloud tops. It's got a lot of energy clearly. It's making the most of those very warm waters and the oceanic heat content under there, which we'll look at shortly, but massive amounts of convection blowing up. Will it take advantage properly though and strengthen to a typhoon? Well, time will tell. Here is the Indian Ocean as well, with a look there, pretty quiet right now. Not much going on at all. Eventually you'll get the system forming out of that mess there just south of the equator. And down in the southern hemisphere, of course, you can still see Nalgae on the northern side there, but in the southern side it's a few storms across Australia, but generally fairly quiet down in the southern hemisphere today, with another little storm blowing up not far from Samoa. Sea surface temperatures then look like this. The eastern Pacific still got quite a bit of heat left, even though the season appears to be shutting down a little bit. Still pushing close to 30 degrees Celsius off the coast of Mexico. The Atlantic still doing well as well. The Caribbean Sea pushing 30 degrees once again, particularly in the central area where that area of interest is likely to track. And looking towards the western Atlantic, there's still some good sea surface temperatures up there as well. But as we saw earlier on the imagery, there's just no real systems that are developing right now, and lots of dry air in the western half. Indian Ocean, still very warm conditions north and south, and it really looks to me as though the southern Indian is really starting to warm up there in the last few days, up to 29-30 degrees ahead of that potential cyclone. And in the western Pacific, still very warm there as well, pushing 30 degrees around the Philippines region and well out to sea off to the east there for late season activity in the western Pacific. You can never really let your guard down on this side of the new year at least. And in the South China Sea, still decent temperatures there as well for the most part. It's above average too, slightly, and just check that Australian region there, very much above average in that area into the Coral Sea right now. La Nina effect though is still prominent in the eastern Pacific, and in the Atlantic it's still generally above average once again still, particularly in the subtropics, but to a lesser extent still in the tropical zone too. Western and central Caribbean still packing in a lot of that oceanic heat, although it appears to be failing now in the westernmost part of the Caribbean Sea, so that's starting to dwindle a little bit. Eastern Pacific also, just that little area right off the coast of central southern Mexico, and in the western Pacific still quite a lot of energy left, but that is also slightly decreasing there, except in the equatorial zone. So let's check those computer models, and this is what the GFS is showing for the next 5 days in the Atlantic. You can see that area there in the western Atlantic possibly developing briefly and then becoming post-tropical rather quickly, but you'll have noticed compared to yesterday when we were watching that storm become probably a category 1 or 2 hurricane down in the southern Caribbean, well, it's pretty much dropped that system completely. You can barely trace it there in the Caribbean Sea. There it is, moving along just south of Hispaniola, but really doesn't get its rotation sorted at all. Western Pacific, you can see this storm right now, typhoon there, and possibly reaching category 2 status briefly as it moves through the Polillo Islands and off towards Aurora province. And then off on the western side of the Philippines, it tries to develop again, becoming a typhoon there off the northwestern tip of Luzon, and then it starts to get shredded away and weakens. But certainly we could be looking at a typhoon landfall out of this. It's a difficult one to call. Looking at it at the moment, it's a very broad system. It could take its time to develop. And this is the Indian Ocean, the southern hemisphere of course, and you can see this new system potentially developing, giving it 10% at the moment because most of its development occurs still outside of the 5-day period. But there it is right at the end, trying to become a tropical storm and almost succeeding, I would say. It gets the winds, but it doesn't look like it quite manages with the rotation right at the very end of that 5-day loop. So that's something to watch out for in future, but maybe not tonight. Let's check the rainfall estimates then for the Philippines, and we're looking at some very high numbers. This colour scale has changed slightly since last time, so they do mean a little bit different, but it's still generally the same. And I'll demonstrate that. So it's pretty much all the red zones there are in excess of 10 inches, that's 250 millimeters, and that can certainly cause problems. But look at some of the maxima in there, around 25 inches for some areas there on the eastern coast, not far from probably in Quezon by that point, but still many areas up above 15 inches. 25 inches, by the way, is 1,000 millimeters of rainfall. That's an incredible amount that could fall over some of those areas that are very susceptible. On Mindoro, 16 inches there, that's 400 millimeters. What else have we got? 29, pushing 30 inches there off the coast of in the South China Sea. So an incredible amount there. And 25 inches, I think I misspoke there, I think it's around 500 millimeters, which is still quite a lot. And here is a look at what's going on in the longer range of the storm, and you can see it there shooting off towards the southwest, only a little bit of its remnants moving into Vietnam, but still quite a strong storm initially. Gives China a run for its money, and then it really dives off towards the southwest. I'm still wondering whether my on-the-spot calculations for those rain amounts were correct with that 25 inches, but it's still a hell of a lot of rain nonetheless. And looking down in the southern hemisphere, this cyclone that develops in the medium range, this is day 5 to 10, remember, moving towards the south, recurving away to the southwest, well out at sea, out of any harm's way, and becomes a category 1 there on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Just to watch it again there, I think it's I can't quite remember how close it gets to the Cocos Islands, but I think it's quite far away from there as well. That should remain completely out to sea. At this point, that's all the serious stuff done with. You can scan the barcode and take a look at the Force 13 merch store. We have all of our usual products, as well as our full season and individual storm animations bespoke to your liking on request, and are still waiting for Hone t-shirt, which is still out there, just like Hone is somewhere or other. In the Scilly range, that storm persists for a little bit longer in the southern Indian Ocean, but look at the northern Indian there. Around 8th to the 10th of November, this system developing and becoming a tropical storm in the Bay of Bengal, off the coast of India there, moving off towards the northeast, recurving, and then eventually landing in Bangladesh right at the very end of that 16-day period. It's a very long way out, so I wouldn't put any faith into that just yet. We saw just the carry on that we had with Sitrang that whole time when it was on the long range, so I wouldn't take anything like that for granted at this point. That's all we have on the long range tonight. Hurricane Week, we announced it the other day, a very late announcement I know, but we are on the way to Hurricane Week 2022. It starts on November 28th and runs through to December the 3rd. Don't miss it, it's going to be a lot of fun. And we also have our Force for Good charity event on December the 4th, that's Sunday. Meanwhile, on this day in 1984, we had 3 systems active, a depression, 17L, making landfall in Louisiana, I think it was, or Mississippi. Vanessa, which was coming off its Category 5 peak, a very powerful storm that one was, with a pressure estimate around 880 millibars, extremely strong. And Warren was a Category 1, doing a little bit of a spaghetti track out in the South China Sea. It had weak steering currents, and it was eventually starting to saunter off towards the west. That was on this day in 1984. Back to this year, and the next name on the Atlantic naming list, if we get any more, is Lisa. In the Eastern Pacific, serious questions do we get any more here, Seymour is next up. And in the Central Pacific, we are still waiting for the first named storm of the season, Hone. In the Western Pacific, the next name now is Banyan. And in the North Indian Ocean, we are now waiting for Mandas after Sitrang occurred. Nalgae, of course, being the latest storm to be named this year. 81 storms have now formed so far, 92 is the average, we're getting pretty close. In the Australian region, the next name is Darian, the Southwest Indian Ocean, Chiniso, and in the South Pacific, next up we have Harley. That's all for tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.